The bank teller laughed at Marie Thompson's balance. In the middle of a quiet Tuesday morning, inside a polished downtown bank, a young employee looked at a computer screen, saw a small number, and turned it into a joke. Several people in the lobby heard the sharp, amused sound of that laughter. For them, it was just another moment in a long line. For Marie, it was something else. It was a reminder of how easily people decide who matters and who does not. What nobody in that building knew that morning was very simple. In 3 days, the woman they thought was almost broke would sign the papers to buy the entire building they were standing in. The place was called Main Street Bank, a glass and stone box on the corner of the busiest road in Riverton. It looked solid and permanent, with tall windows and metal letters over the entrance. Many people walked past it every day without a second thought. To Marie, it was loaded with memories. She was 38 years old, a black woman with natural hair pulled back from her face and the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to move carefully in the world. She wore a plain blazer, a simple blouse, and carried a thin, black portfolio. Nothing in her appearance shouted about success or money. She had learned long ago that attention was not always safe. Marie joined the line inside the lobby and held her portfolio close. In front of her stood an older man in a gray suit, a young couple with a stroller, and a woman scrolling on her phone. The bank had warm lights, muted colors, and framed photographs of the town's early days. Somewhere behind the counter, a printer clicked and hummed. When the line moved, Marie watched how the teller behaved. With some customers, the young woman behind the counter was all smiles and warmth. Her name tag said Rebecca Miller. Her body language was open and friendly when she spoke to the older white gentleman, and she treated him as if he were an important guest. By the time Marie reached the counter, the atmosphere changed. The teller's smile faded. Her tone turned brisk and impatient. She looked Marie up and down in a quick, evaluating glance that said more than any words. Marie asked to close an account and receive a cashier's check. She handed over her card. The teller inserted it, waited for the balance to appear, and raised her eyebrows in surprise. Then she made a small sound that was almost a laugh. She made a remark about how tiny the balance was, how unusual it was to see an account with so little left in it. She joked loudly enough that people in the line could hear. To Rebecca, it was a casual comment. To Marie, it felt like someone had taken her history, her effort, and her dignity, and reduced them to a punchline. Marie felt the familiar heat of humiliation in her chest. She also felt eyes on her back and the old instinct to shrink, to disappear, to avoid making trouble. What the teller did not know was that the tiny number on the screen existed for a reason. Marie had already moved most of her savings to another bank, into a business account linked to a real estate deal. What remained was a leftover amount. She was closing out before the final transfer. The teller saw a small figure. She did not see the years of sacrifice behind it or the much larger numbers that had already moved elsewhere. Marie kept her voice level. She completed the forms. The teller acted as if she were doing her a favor, as if someone with a small balance did not really deserve time or respect. When the cashier's check was finally pushed across the counter, it came with a mechanical farewell and no eye contact. Marie took the check, picked up her portfolio, and walked out without answering. She did not trust herself to speak. She stepped into the cold air and let the door close behind her. On the steps outside, she paused, turned, and looked up at the letters over the entrance. Main Street Bank. The building looked imposing, clean, and distant, but Marie saw it differently. To her, it was layered with memories of late nights, cleaning chemicals, and her mother's tired hands. Marie had not been born into comfort. She grew up on the south side of town in a neighborhood that the city often forgot. Her mother, Denise, worked nights as a cleaner. For years, she scrubbed floors and wiped glass in this very bank. Sometimes, when no one else could watch Marie, she brought her along. The little girl would sit at a conference table with school books while her mother emptied trash cans and polished the metal railings. From that vantage point, Marie learned two important lessons. First, that the people who cleaned offices were often invisible to those who used them. Second, that being invisible meant you could observe everything. She listened to conversations, watched which offices stayed lit late, and paid attention to how money seemed to flow in and out of places like this. As a teenager, she took part-time cleaning jobs herself. Later, she started a small company, Thompson Facility Services. At first, it was just her, a used vacuum, and a borrowed van. Slowly, through reliability and word of mouth, she collected clients: a dentist's office, a small law firm, a daycare center. She saved ruthlessly. She also studied, taking online classes in business and real estate whenever she could. Marie noticed empty buildings and underused spaces. She read about property values and taxes. One day, she realized that cleaning offices gave her a map of where opportunity might be hiding. When she finally had enough for a down payment, she bought a modest commercial property on the edge of downtown. Then, a few years later, another one. Tenants paid rent. She reinvested. Her balance sheets grew slowly but steadily. By her mid-30s, Marie owned 2 small buildings and had built a reputation as a fair and responsive landlord. She kept her financial life quiet. She drove an older car and did not flash designer labels. Most people still saw only a hard-working black woman with a cleaning company. That was fine with her. Then one evening, while scanning commercial listings online, she saw something that made her sit up straight. The address on the screen was 410 Main Street. It was the same building that held Main Street Bank, the building her mother had once cleaned and that now stood as a symbol of power in the center of town. The listing said the owner was motivated to sell. The market had shifted. Remote work had changed demand. The out-of-state investor wanted to exit. At first, the idea felt impossible. This was not a small office on the edge of downtown. This was the building everybody recognized. Marie ran the numbers anyway. The price was high, but not entirely out of reach. With her existing equity, a bank loan, and a partner, it could, barely, work. She thought of David Morales, the quiet mechanic who ran an auto shop 2 blocks from her childhood home. He had become her client years ago and had mentioned once that he wanted to invest in something solid. Together, they did the math, met with advisors, and formed a new company, MDT Properties. It was a risk, but a calculated one. That is why Marie had gone to Main Street Bank that Tuesday morning. She was simply closing an old personal account, clearing the last small pieces before the final step of the deal. The teller's mockery was not part of any plan, but it carved itself into her memory anyway. After leaving the bank, Marie crossed the street to a small cafe. David was waiting with a laptop open and spreadsheets on the screen. She told him calmly what had happened at the counter. He was angry on her behalf and suggested filing a complaint. Marie considered it and then decided that the best answer would be to quietly complete the purchase and let the facts speak for themselves. 3 days later, she walked through the same doors again, this time escorted by a security guard to a conference room on the 5th floor. There, she met the current owner of the building and the regional manager of the bank, along with a lawyer and a stack of documents. The atmosphere was respectful. The tone was professional. There were no jokes about balances. Marie signed document after document. Each signature represented years of life, nights when her mother came home exhausted, mornings when she herself scrubbed office floors, weekends spent studying contracts instead of relaxing. When the final paper was signed, the seller shook her hand and confirmed that MDT Properties now owned 410 Main Street. The regional manager congratulated her on building a company from the ground up. He suggested introducing her to the branch staff so they would know their new landlord. Marie agreed. She felt a quiet resolve rather than triumph. She had no interest in public revenge. She did, however, want something to change. They rode the elevator down together. When the doors opened, the lobby looked exactly as it had before. Lines of customers, humming machines, small conversations. The manager asked for attention and introduced Marie as the new owner of the building. A wave of surprise moved through the staff. Among the tellers, Rebecca recognized her immediately. The last time she had seen Marie, she had laughed at what she believed was a tiny account. Now she learned that the same woman controlled the property that housed her job. Marie met her eyes. In that moment, she could see fear, embarrassment, and confusion on the young woman's face. It would have been easy to take pleasure in that. Instead, Marie spoke calmly and clearly. She explained that every person who approached the counter carried more than a number on a screen. They carried history, sacrifice, and hope. She explained that laughing at someone's small balance might feel harmless, but it could deepen shame that had already been learned through years of discrimination. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult or threaten. She simply described what it felt like to stand there and be treated as less than human. The manager listened. Other employees listened. Rebecca listened with reddened cheeks and damp eyes. Later that month, the bank updated its training programs. Staff attended sessions on bias and respectful service. A new policy emphasized that every customer, regardless of the size of their account, deserved patience and dignity. A small plaque appeared in the lobby, noting that the building was now owned by a locally controlled company focused on community development. Marie continued to run MDT Properties quietly and effectively. She improved maintenance in the building, supported local businesses as tenants, and began planning a scholarship fund for young people from her old neighborhood who wanted to study business or trades. She did all this without fanfare. Sometimes, when she walked past the bank, she remembered the sting of that first moment when laughter had echoed across the lobby. Now, however, the memory sat in a different place inside her. It had become a turning point rather than a wound. The teller saw a tiny account and felt free to mock it. What she did not see was the long road behind it. The little girl in a dark office, the mother scrubbing floors at night, the young entrepreneur taking online classes after double shifts, the cautious investor learning how buildings change hands. She did not see the equity, the partnerships, or the courage it takes for someone from a marginalized community to take such a risk. In the end, the story of Marie Thompson and the bank was not about revenge. It was about perspective. It showed how easily people confuse visible wealth with value and how wrong that assumption can be. It also showed that dignity can be quietly powerful. A woman walked into a bank and was treated as if her presence did not matter. A few days later, she walked into the same building as its owner and used that power not to humiliate others, but to demand a higher standard of respect for everyone who would ever stand in that line again.